Welcome to Hearthstone, and in the words of the great Malfurion, my greetings. So today I want to take a look at the new Druid cards introduced through Whispers of the Old Gods. Now, I think the standard format up to now has been a look at the cards and sort of an expectation and what they might deliver. And my aim is sort of a more retrospective thing. I'm going to look at what was expected of these cards and what the actual reality of them is 1 week later. Obviously things haven't fully settled, but by this point we have a solid idea of how some of the cards are performing. So the first of the Druid cards I want to take a look at is the Forbidden Ancient. Now this is the 1 mana 1/1, spend all of your mana and gain +1/+1 for each mana spent. Now I think the initial response to this card was fairly underwhelming. I think the problem is no matter what mana cost you play him on, he's always going to be below the curve for that. So we look at something like a Chillwind Yeti. It's a 4 mana 4/5. If you play the Forbidden Ancient as 4 mana, you only get a 4/4, which is like a Dark Iron Dwarf, except you don't get the +2 attack battlecry. Now, the benefit of the Forbidden Ancient is the flexibility, which is something that Druids seem to thrive on with their Choose 1 cards, but I don't think this one is quite powerful enough. You just play an understated minion, he doesn't have taunt, he doesn't do anything special. Really the only upside is that he can be played on curve at any time. I'm not sure that's strong enough to sacrifice a slot on your deck to include this guy, because the Druid decks are pretty tight with what they want to include already. The next card I want to take a look at is the Mark of Isharaj, and this is the give a minion +2/+2, and if it's a beast you get to draw a card. A lot of people compared this to Mark of the Wilds, except it loses the taunt factor, but it gains the draw a card factor, which is potentially very, very valuable. I think the only problem so far is we haven't seen an emergence of any sort of beast druid deck thus far. I think maybe in future something like that might come up, but at the moment we only have a handful of beasts thrown in. A lot of the druid decks are going for the more Cthulhu variation of things. Currently, Druids seem to run Mounted Raptor occasionally, Druid of the Claw almost always, and while these are great beasts, it's kinda hard to justify holding this card in your hand waiting for the right moment. So I think at the moment a lot of people aren't including this card, but I think this is maybe one of the sleeper hits, and in future it could become very powerful. The next card on the list here is the Adult Grizzly, and on the topic of beast synergy, this is another beast. After you summon a minion, you give it +1/+1. Now, the notable thing here is the keyword summon instead of the keyword play. Summon refers to any minions that spawn on your board, be it through death rattles, hero powers, your opponent gives you something with a hungry dragon, anything like that will get +1/+1. Now, this might work well in the old style token druid deck we've seen in the past. I think one of the big problems here though is we've lost the Haunted Creeper. A potentially good play would be Haunted Creeper on 2, Adult Grizzly on 3, sacrifice your Haunted Creeper, pop out the Spectral Spiders to get +1/+1 each. The problem I see with this now is simply the low stats that it affords. You can't set up the preemptive Haunted Creeper plays, and playing a 3 mana 2/2, there is very, very little chance this card is going to last. The only potential here is combo plays, but at the moment, Druids seem to be playing out their hands very fast, so holding on to cards for combos isn't entirely viable. Mostly the reason for that is the nerf to the Ancient of Lore card draw. Some people are including Nourish to counter this, some are not and are just sticking with the standard Azure Drakes. But it seems a theme at the moment is that Druids run out of cards very, very fast. And a lot of people are saying, Druid is the new Shaman, which I don't entirely agree with, because I think the Cthulhu style Druid is pretty powerful, but they've definitely taken a knockdown and they're a lower tier of class now, and I don't think this Adult Grizzly is going to help pull them out of that hole. Okay, doomsaying aside, the next card here is Pharaoh Reg, and I actually like this card. It's not super powerful, but it's the sort of card that's versatile, the card you might want to include and you might want, and I think the mark of a good card is one that you'll include in some decks, but not every deck ever. We look at things like Dr. Boom, Ancient of Lore. These are cards that are put in every single deck ever. And I think I prefer a card like this that has, you can put it in if it matches your deck style, you can exclude it if it doesn't. What this one does is it works on the standard choose one style, and you can give your hero +4 attack, or you can gain 8 armor. So you can look at this to being similar to Bite for the +4 attack, or Healing Touch for the gain 8 armor. Typically though, gain 8 armor is a bit better than restore 8 health, because you can push yourself above 30. The primary downside is you can only target this on your hero, you can't give minions armor. But I think the card is saved by the versatility of it. If you want to push the attack, you can go the +4, you can take out an opponent's creature, especially on 3 mana. You know, it's sort of the equivalent of a Shadow Bolt. Whilst not a great card, 3 mana deal 4, it's still okay. It's not completely terrible. And, you know, if you're being flooded by aggro, if they're playing like some sort of face shaman or a Zoolock, you really need that armor just to last another turn to pump out your big taunt. You can pick that, and you know, you gain your 8 armor, you're back up. Next turn you play like Ancient of War, you stabilize the game. It's great. If you wanted to include Healing Touch in your deck, you almost have no reason to anymore. You lose the flexibility of targeting minions, but most of the time Healing Touch was used primarily to heal the hero. So I think Pharaoh Reg all but replaces Healing Touch in most situations. The next card here is the Druid Legendary, and that's Fandral Staghelm. Those of you who play World of Warcraft will be familiar with this guy from the Firelands raids. And this has the interesting effect of combining your choose one cards and giving you both of the effects when you play one of those. Interestingly, there was a bug with this card where the interaction with Dark Whispers, that's the card that spawns the 5 wisps or gives you +5/+5 in taunt. This was allowing Dark Whispers to target your own hero, which is entirely bizarre, but you could target your own hero, give your hero taunt and permanent 5 attack that worked on your opponent's turn. Obviously this was completely broken and was hotfixed by Blizzard very soon afterwards, but it sort of covers the running theme of Fandral Staghelm just breaking stuff. Another example is with the Raven Idol. You play the Discover effect, and you're not supposed to get 2 of the same card on Discover, but when played with Fandral Staghelm, you do get 2 of the same cards. I can only imagine this card is coded in a very strange way. He's designed such that for the Druid forms he gives you an entirely new creature, and for the spells he creates an entirely new spell. Say for instance Wrath, he doesn't do the +1 and then the +3, he does +4 all at once and draws a card. So these are completely new spells that are coded in, which sort of explains where the problem with Dark Whispers might have come up, where they forgot to flag it to only target minions. So I think it's only a matter of time before we see the next bug come up with Fandral Staghelm. Eventually they should iron stuff out like that. I think the initial opinion on this card was very mixed. A lot of people thought, you know, this is the new thing, this is going to be so ridiculous, it's insane. Some people were more skeptical, saying, you know, it's hard to combo it. Costs 4 mana, you can combine it with like a Druid of the Claw at best, it costs too much to combine with Ancient of War. I think it's turned out to be somewhere in the middle. It's not completely broken, but a 4 mana 3/5 has a relative amount of HP, it's not always going to get removed. You can conceivably play it on curve and then curve into a Druid of the Claw next turn to get your 4/6 taunt charge, or combine it with something like the Charging Druids and you get your 3/2 stealth and charge, which is an odd combination. But still, I suppose it's got some sort of synergy with Faceless Manipulator buff cheesing, but that aside, I think Staghelm's an okay card. He's another example of something that's not going to be in every Druid deck, but there are some that will sit, which I think is good card design. Moving on to potentially OP territory, we have the Klaxi Amber Weaver. And this card gains 5 health if your Cthulhu has at least 10 attack. And that makes this a 4/10, which is, you know, it's pretty crazy. Handlock used to play Twilight Drakes a lot in the past, and they would sometimes go 4/8, 4/9, 4/10 on occasion. And we know how hard those things are to remove. This thing is going to be a 4/10 almost every time. The initial response to this was sort of lukewarm. It was like, okay, how easy is it going to be to get Cthulhu to 10 attack? Can we do that reliably? Mostly the answer has been yes, you can do that reliably. You can go something like turn 2 Beckoner of Evil, bump Cthulhu up to 8. Turn 3 you can go the Disciple, deal 2 damage, bump Cthulhu up to 10. Turn 4 you go Amber Weaver. This is what makes the Cthulhu deck just so strong. This Amber Weaver is just completely unstoppable. Even if you silence him, which has gone out of the meta somewhat because of the Arabic Owl nerfs, he's still a 4/5, he's still a Yeti, he's still, great stats. He's just an all-round amazing creature. He's one of the best that the Druid's got in this set. Next card here is the Meijer Keeper, another choose one card, and you get to summon a 2/2 slime, or you get to gain an empty mana crystal. Now, people were saying this card was going to be very powerful, and I think mostly that prediction has been met. You gain the flexibility of summoning the 2/2 slime, which is 5/5 combined stats for 4 mana, which is great. You spread it across 2 creatures so it can't be removed in one spell. Or you gain the option of gaining an empty mana crystal. The only problem with the Meijer Keeper is if you play him on turn 4, you gain your empty mana crystal, next turn you ramp up to 6 mana. Now traditionally Druids haven't had a lot of good cards to play on 6 mana. You wanted to go to 7 for things like your Ancient of Lore, your Ancient of War. However, the introduction of the Darkire Akua, a new Druid card, means that the 6 mana slot is actually quite powerful, because Darkire Akua is a very good card. So the slime option and the mana crystal option are both great. This card is going to become a staple in quite a lot of Druid decks, I'd say. He might not be included in the faster token style Druid if that comes back, but certainly slower ones like Cthulhu Druids or some kind of ramp control Druid will want to include this card for sure. I mentioned the Darkire Akua, and here he is. He is a 5/7 with Taunt for 6 mana. He's got the same stat line as Toshli, but he loses the spare parts effect and gains Taunt instead. The big thing here is he gives your Cthulhu +3/+3, which is a very large buff to Cthulhu. Now, he is great. He's only 1 attack less than the Boulder Fist Ogre, which is sort of the vanilla style minion for 6 mana. But he gains Taunt, and he's statted heavily towards his health, which is great on a Taunt minion. He's just got just the right amount of attack to deal with stuff. He's got enough health to survive an onslaught of creatures in a zoo deck, and he buffs your Cthulhu to ramp up to the finisher. This card is another one of the things that makes Cthulhu Druid just great. Combine this guy with the Klaxi Amber Weaver, and you've got a great curve of minions, and their power level is just off the charts.
Vegeta, what does the scouter say about his power level? It's over 9,000! What, 9,000? There's no way that can be right!
So the final card for Druid here is Wisps of the Old Gods. Now, I think a lot of people were expecting something like this. Blizzard liked their Wisp puns, look back at Dark Whispers. Wisps of the Old Gods was inevitable. So this is like Dark Whispers, but sort of ramped up a little bit. Instead of 5 Wisps, you get 7 Wisps, or you can give all of your minions +2/+2. I don't think anyone was really expecting this card to be serious. 7 mana is a big cost for 7 Wisps. They could be wiped out by Swipe, because Druid Cthulhu is quite popular. They can be wiped out by the Ravaging Ghoul, the new Warrior card, because Warrior Cthulhu is very popular. The risk is so high. Looking at the effect to give minions +2/+2, we note that's the same effect that Cenarius has. And with Cenarius, you pay 9 mana for this effect, but you also gain a 5/8. So I have to wonder, why play this card when you can just play Cenarius instead? You're rarely going to want the Wisps. The +2/+2 sometimes is useful, and in the cases it is useful, you just want to use Cenarius instead. At least Cenarius has the flexibility of spawning the taunts. Overall, this card is pretty garbage. Say your Yogg-Saron pulls him, you're not completely disappointed, you get a board full of creatures. I don't see this guy being included in many serious Druid decks, if any at all. Okay, so next up I want to have a look at some of the original Druid cards from the vanilla set that have been changed in the patch. I think Druids got hit the hardest with the nerf bat, which has left them in a bit of an unfortunate position. Now, you may be familiar with the Ancient of Lore. It was the 7 mana 5/5 and it had to choose one. You could restore 5 health, or you could draw 2 cards. Most of the time, this was used to draw 2 cards. As I mentioned before, Druids tend to play out their hand very quickly. You throw down Innervates, another Innervate, your Wild Growths, you ramp up, you play a big creature, your hand is empty, but you have great board control. The risk now is your minion gets removed, and you're kind of screwed then because you don't have the Ancient of Lore to pull you back out the pit and draw more cards. Some people have been experimenting with trying Nourish. I guess Nourish is okay, it's not as good as Ancient of Lore was. It's a big tempo loss to do 5 mana, draw 3 cards, and druids are all about tempo and ramping into big creatures and just taking control of the game. This is a really crippling loss for druid. This is the biggest one, I think, and this is the thing that's knocked druids down a tier. This is a very, very difficult card to replace, especially in a class like druid that plays all of their hand out quite quickly. It's unfortunate, but I do think Ancient of Lore was a little bit too powerful. He was included in basically every single druid deck ever, and Blizzard have said in the past, if a card is included in every single deck, they're not too keen on that. We look at stuff like the old Novice Engineer, which was nerfed for the same reason. So overall, a bit of a crippling loss. We haven't really seen a good way to fix this yet, besides Nourish, which isn't ideal. Maybe something will come up in the future, and we'll see how that develops. The next druid card that was nerfed is Force of Nature. If you've played Hearthstone for any more than 5 minutes, you're familiar with Force of Nature. You're playing against the druids. You finally beat down his big creature, so he innervated out early. You think you're doing okay, you've got board control. Suddenly, you hear Force of Nature, you hear the roar of Savage Roar, and you're just viciously beat down from a safe 14 HP. Basically, if you were playing druids, and you were on 14 HP, you were on a clock, you had to worry if they had combo, you had to play around combo the whole time. Sometimes you had to play around the super combo, which was like, Force, Savage Roar, Innervate, more Savage Roars, more Innervates, and they could just do absurd amounts of damage from nothing. You had to be constantly wary of what could happen, and most druid games came down to, do I die to combo? Do I live to combo? Does he have combo? How long has he been holding these cards for? This wasn't a great thing because this was in every druid deck ever, and most druid games just sort of based around this. So, Force of Nature was nerfed to summon 3 2/2 Trents, which it did before, except they lose charge this time, and they don't die at the end of the turn. So, to compensate for this, they reduced the cost of it down to 5 mana. Basically, the card has been mostly reworked. I think current Force of Nature is actually a decent card. People haven't been including it too much because it doesn't fit the niche of current druid decks very well. But I think it's an alright standalone card. It's not outstanding, it's not going to break the game. Some people might include it, but I think it's a little bit below the power curve of expected class cards. Overall though, I think a lot of people are happy to see the druid combo just go out the window. Personally, I believe Force of Nature was okay. I think the problematic card in the combo was Savage Roar, because it's like Bloodlust Light, and it costs 2 less mana, which is a very, very big deal. I think Savage Roar was the problem and not Force of Nature, but Blizzard obviously decided that Force of Nature was the easier card to nerf. Maybe Savage Roar was harder to balance, maybe they thought Force of Nature was the problem. Either way, Savage Roar remains unchanged. Force of Nature gets the nerf bat, and we now have this new version. The final druid card that was nerfed is the Keeper of the Grove. This was yet another card that was included in every single druid deck ever. Keeper of the Grove was the 2/4, with to choose one to deal 2 damage, or to silence a minion. This thing is mostly part of Blizzard's attempt to nerf silence effects. We've seen it in the Ironbeak Owl as well, where the mana cost was increased. And the Keeper of the Grove had its stats reduced to a 2/2. I think Keeper of the Grove is still a reasonable card. If you want to run Silence, you have the option of Keeper of the Grove on 4 mana for a 2/2. You have the option of Spellbreaker, 4 mana 4/3. Or you have the option of Ironbeak Owl, which is a 3 mana 2/1. I think these changes have pushed Silence into a more niche category, rather than most decks out there, including a 1-of Ironbeak Owl, or most druid decks including the 2-of Keeper of the Grove. This is a good place for Silence to be, because Silence is often seen as a very anti-fun mechanic. You play out your big minion with a special effect, say Sylvanas, suddenly, hoot hoots, out comes the owl, your card does nothing. It's very disappointing to see that happen, so I think the change to make Silence more niche is great. Keeper of the Grove is still good because you get the versatility on the dealing 2 damage, and 2 damage is great for dealing with stuff like a Knife Juggler. Even though Knife Juggler was nerfed, he's still seeing a lot of play in Zoo Warlock decks and Paladin decks. So overall, I think, similar to what I've said before, Keeper of the Grove is going to be a card that's in some druid decks, but not all druid decks, which is a great place for it to be. Okay, so thanks for listening to my inane ramblings on the new Druid cards and the changes to the old Druid cards. Ran on a bit longer than I expected it to, but that seems to be an overarching theme for all of the stuff I do. Next time I should be back with another class, possibly Hunter. We're going to have a look at the new cards they've got, and we should progress through all of these classes. I hope to get it done in a bit of a shorter format, but it looks like we're going for the long still one, so you can look forward to that next time. Hurrah! But until then, goodbye.